Hands where I can see them. The command came sharp and sudden, slicing through the quiet suburban street like a siren that hadn't been turned on yet. The boy froze. He was 17, tall for his age, but still unmistakably young. Backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling uselessly from his hoodie. He slowly raised his hands, palms open, heart slamming against his ribs so hard it felt like it might bruise them from the inside. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice cracking just enough to betray how scared he was, trying not to be. The police cruiser idled behind him, lights off, engine humming low. Two officers stood a few feet away. One had his hand resting casually on his belt. The other was already scanning the street, eyes moving from house to house, as if expecting danger to appear out of thin air. "Where are you coming from?" the first officer asked. The boy swallowed. "School," he said. "I was staying late for turnaround." The interruption landed heavy. The boy hesitated for half a second, then complied, turning slowly, carefully, like every movement had to be negotiated in advance. "Keep your hands up." "Yes, sir." The word "sir" came out automatically. He'd been taught to say it, taught that respect might keep him safe. It didn't feel like it was working. Cold metal clicked around his wrists, not tight enough to hurt, just tight enough to remind him who was in control. Across the street, a curtain twitched. Someone was watching. The boy's face burned. "What's this about?" he asked quietly. The second officer stepped closer, eyes narrowing slightly. "We got a call," he said. "Suspicious person matching your description." The boy frowned despite himself. "My description," he repeated. The officer didn't answer, because he didn't have to. They both knew what that meant. Black, young, alone. That was enough. The boy stood there, cuffed on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun dipping low behind the houses, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him like accusing fingers. He thought about his mother, about how she'd warned him just that morning, before he'd left the house. "Come straight home," she'd said. "Don't take shortcuts. And if anything happens, stay calm," he'd promised. Now he wondered if calm was even an option. The first officer pulled out a notepad. "Name?" "Marcus Hill," the boy said. "Age?" 17. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Got ID?" Marcus nodded quickly. "In my backpack," he said. "Front. Pocket." The officer glanced at his partner, then unzipped the backpack himself, rifling through it without ceremony. Notebooks, a textbook, a pencil case, a folded paper with school letterhead. He pulled out the student ID. Jefferson High School. Honor roll sticker in the corner. The officer barely glanced at it. "Why are you out here?" he asked again. "I live 2 blocks over," Marcus said. "I was walking home." At this time, Marcus looked up, confused. "It's 4:30, he said. "School just ended," the second officer scoffed softly. "Funny," he said. "Cole said you were casing houses." Marcus's chest tightened. "That's not true," he said quickly. "I wasn't. I don't even—" "Relax," the officer cut in. "We're just asking questions." But his grip on Marcus's arm tightened slightly as he guided him toward the cruiser. "Sit." The back door opened. The inside smelled like vinyl and something stale. Marcus hesitated. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said again, more desperately this time. The officer leaned in close, voice low. "Then you've got nothing to worry about." The door shut. The sound echoed. Marcus sat stiffly in the back seat, cuffs biting into his wrists now as adrenaline surged through his body. The window was scratched, cloudy, turning the world outside into a blur. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He couldn't reach it. Outside, the officers talked quietly, radios crackling softly. Marcus caught fragments of words through the glass. Description matched. "I'm better safe. Neighborhood's been on edge. Better safe." From what? From him? He leaned his forehead gently against the window, eyes closing for just a moment. He tried to slow his breathing. In, out. This couldn't be happening. He was supposed to be home by 5. He had dinner plans, homework, a history test tomorrow he'd actually studied for. He thought about the essay he'd stayed late to finish, the one his teacher had praised him for, saying he had real potential. Potential didn't seem to matter right now. A knock on the glass startled him. The first officer opened the door. "Step out!" Marcus complied, legs shaky as he stood. The officer guided him back to the sidewalk, uncuffed one wrist, then the other. Relief surged through Marcus's chest. Too early. "Stand right here," the officer said. "Don't move." Marcus nodded, rubbing his wrists instinctively. The second officer was on the phone now, voice clipped. "Yes, we have him. Male, black, teenage. Yeah, says he lives nearby." Marcus clenched his jaw. He wanted to scream that he had a name, that he wasn't him. A car slowed as it passed. The driver stared. Marcus stared back, cheeks burning. This was how it started. He'd heard the stories, seen the videos. Moments like this, frozen in time, where one wrong assumption could spiral into something irreversible. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He shifted slightly. "Can I answer my phone?" he asked, voice careful. The officer looked at him sharply. "Who's calling?" "You." "My mom," Marcus said. "She's expecting me home." The officer hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet." Marcus swallowed hard. Minutes dragged. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened. Then the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled to life. The second officer listened, then frowned. "Dispatch says the caller couldn't provide details," he said. "Just said, a black kid walking slow." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Walking slow. That was the crime. The first officer sighed, annoyed. "All right," he said. "We'll run his name." Marcus's stomach dropped. Run his name. He'd never been in trouble, never arrested, never even suspended. But he'd seen how names could become stories if someone decided to tell them wrong. The officer typed into his cruiser computer. Marcus stood there, hands at his sides, trying not to look scared, trying not to look angry, trying not to look like anything that could be misinterpreted. The computer beeped. The officer frowned. Then frowned deeper. "That's odd," he muttered. "What?" the second officer asked. "Systems flagging something," he said. "Hold on." Marcus's heart pounded. Flagging what? He hadn't done anything. The officer typed again. Then his radio buzzed. "Unit 12, a voice said. "We're patching a call through. Says it's urgent." The officer picked up the radio. "This is Unit 12. There was a brief pause. Then the voice on the other end said something that made the officer's posture change instantly. His shoulders stiffened. His expression shifted from bored authority to alert attention. "Yes, sir," he said suddenly. "He's with us now." Marcus's breath caught. "Sir?" The officer turned to Marcus, eyes unreadable. "Who did you say your mother was calling?" he asked. Marcus swallowed. "She works at the hospital," he said. The officer held up a hand. The radio crackled again. A different voice now, calm, controlled, older. "This is Chief Daniel Harris," the voice said. "I need you to listen, very carefully." The street seemed to go quiet. Marcus's ears rang. The officer straightened fully. "Yes, Chief," he replied. Marcus's heart slammed. "Chief?" the voice continued. "You have detained my son." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, and in that moment, everything changed. The officer didn't respond right away. For a brief moment, he just stood there, radio pressed to his shoulder, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The casual authority he'd worn minutes ago had vanished, replaced by something sharper, more cautious. "Yes, Chief," he said again. "We have him detained on a suspicious persons call." Marcus's stomach twisted. Detained. The word felt heavy, official, like it belonged to someone else's life, not his. The voice on the radio was calm, measured, the kind of voice that didn't rush because it didn't need to. "I'm aware of the call," Chief Harris said, "and I'm also aware of who made it." The first officer glanced at his partner. The second officer's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir," the first officer replied. "We're just following procedure." There was a pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. "Then let's talk about that procedure," the chief said. "Start by telling me exactly why my son was placed in handcuffs." Marcus felt his heart leap painfully in his chest. "My son." The words echoed. The officer cleared his throat. "The caller reported a suspicious male matching his description," he said, walking slowly, looking at houses. "And did you observe any criminal behavior?" the chief asked. The officer hesitated. "No, sir," he admitted, "but the neighborhood has had recent—" "Answer the question," the chief interrupted, his tone firm but controlled. "No, sir," the officer repeated. Marcus stood frozen, barely breathing. "Then explain to me," the chief continued, "why a 17-year-old honor student walking home from school was handcuffed on a public sidewalk." The officer swallowed. "We believed it was for safety," he said weakly. "Safety? For whom?" the chief asked. Silence. Marcus had never heard silence sound so loud. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward the passing cars, toward the houses with their watching windows. The chief's voice came back, lower now. "You ran his name," he said. "What did you find?" The officer glanced at the cruiser computer again. "No priors," he said. "No record. Clean." "Then what was flagged?" the chief asked. The officer hesitated again. "Internal system alert," he said. "Family connection." "Say it plainly," the chief replied. The officer took a breath. "Your last name." Marcus's legs felt weak. The chief exhaled slowly. "And that changed your tone," he said. The officer didn't deny it. "Yes, sir." The chief's voice hardened, not with anger, but with disappointment. "That's the problem." Marcus stared at the ground, mind racing. His father was the police chief. He knew his mom worked long hours, knew she took calls late at night, knew she carried herself with quiet authority. But this, the chief continued. "My son was cooperative," he said. "He was respectful. He asked permission before moving, and you still decided he was a threat." "No, sir," the officer said quickly. "We didn't—" "You put him in cuffs," the chief said. "That's a decision." The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. Behind them, a neighbor stepped onto their porch, pretending to check the mail. Another curtain twitched. Marcus felt exposed, small. The chief's voice softened slightly. "Marcus," he said. Marcus flinched. "Yes, sir," he replied instinctively. "You're doing fine," the chief said. "Just stay where you are." Marcus nodded, even though the chief couldn't see him. The officer shifted again, then spoke quietly into the radio. "Chief, what would you like us to do?" There it was. The question that changed everything. The chief didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were deliberate. "I want you to uncuff my son," he said. "Immediately." The officer complied at once, stepping forward, unlocking the cuffs, letting them fall away. The metal felt heavy as it dropped into his hand. Marcus rubbed his wrists, skin red and sore. "I want you to apologize to him," the chief continued. "Not because I'm the chief, but because you were wrong." The officer stiffened, then turned to Marcus. "I'm sorry," he said, voice flat, rehearsed. Marcus nodded. unsure what to say. The apology didn't erase what had happened. It just acknowledged it. And then the chief added, "I want you to think about what would have happened if that call hadn't come through." The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." The radio clicked off. For a moment, no one moved. The street felt different now, heavier. The power dynamic had shifted, but the discomfort remained, hanging in the air like smoke. The second officer finally spoke. "You're free to go," he said to Marcus. Marcus picked up his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder. His hands still trembled, slightly. "Marcus," the first officer said. Marcus paused, then turned. The officer hesitated, then said quietly, "You did nothing wrong." Marcus nodded again. He didn't trust himself to speak. As he walked away, he could feel eyes on his back. Not threatening now, curious, uncertain. At the end of the block he stopped, pulled out his phone. 23 missed calls, all from his mum. He hit call. She answered on the first ring. "Marcus," she said, breathless. "Where are you?" "I'm okay," he said. "I'm coming home." There was a pause. "Are you safe?" she asked. Marcus glanced back down the street. "Yes," he said. But the word didn't feel solid. As he continued walking, the weight of what had almost happened settled over him, if not for one call, if not for one last name. He didn't finish the thought. Behind him, the officers stood in silence, watching him disappear down the street. The first officer finally spoke. "That could have gone bad," he muttered. The second officer nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It could have." Neither of them said what they were really thinking, that it went differently only because of who Marcus's father was, and that thought would follow them longer than the report they were about to file. Because this story wasn't over, not even close. Marcus didn't talk much on the walk home. His mom stayed on the line the entire time, even after he told her he was safe. She didn't ask questions yet. She knew better. Some things needed to settle before they could be spoken. When he finally turned the corner onto their street, he saw her car parked halfway onto the curb, hazard lights flashing. She was already out of the car when he came into view. "Marcus." She pulled him into a hug so tight it knocked the air from his lungs. "I'm okay," he said automatically, even as his hands shook against her back. She held him for a moment longer than usual, then pulled away just enough to look at his face. Her eyes scanned him the way only a parent's could, checking. For injuries, for cracks, for signs that something inside had broken. "They put cuffs on you," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. Her jaw tightened. Inside the house, everything felt too normal. The smell of dinner still lingered. His backpack landed in its usual spot by the door. The clock on the wall read 5:12 p.m. Time had kept moving, even when his world had stalled on that sidewalk. He sat at the kitchen table while his mom poured him a glass of water with trembling hands. "Drink," she said. He did. Only then did she sit. "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked gently. Marcus stared into the glass. "They said someone called," he said. "Said I looked suspicious." She closed her eyes briefly. "They asked questions," he continued. "They didn't believe me. His voice caught. "They put me in the car." Her hand tightened around the edge of the table. "They kept calling me him," Marcus said. Like I didn't have a name." Silence filled the kitchen. Then the front door opened. Chief Daniel Harris stepped inside. He didn't look like the chief right now. He looked like a father who had arrived too late. Marcus looked up. His dad crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt in front of him, gripping Marcus's shoulders. "Hey," he said softly, "look at me." Marcus did. "I am so sorry," his father said. Marcus frowned. "You didn't do it," he said. "I didn't stop it," his father replied. That landed harder. Later that night, after Marcus had gone to his room, Chief Harris sat alone in his office. The badge on his desk caught the light from the lamp. He stared at it. For 23 years he had worn it with pride, believed in what it stood for, believed that progress was slow but real. And yet, his own son had been handcuffed on a quiet street for walking home. He opened the incident report, read it line by line. Suspicious individual. Detained briefly. No further action required. It was clean, professional, and completely empty. None of the fear, none of the humiliation, none of the truth. He closed the file, then opened a new one. Internal affairs. The next morning, the two officers were called in. They sat across from Chief Harris in the conference room, posture rigid, hands folded neatly in front of them. "This is not a punishment meeting," the chief said evenly. "This is an accountability meeting." The first officer nodded. "Yes, sir." Chief Harris leaned forward slightly. "Walk me through your decision-making," he said. The officer cleared his throat. "We received a call," he began. The caller was concerned. "Concerned about what?" the chief asked. The officer hesitated. "About a young man walking slowly in the neighborhood." "And at what point did that justify handcuffs?" the chief pressed. The officer glanced at his partner. "For officer safety," he said. The chief nodded slowly. "Did he resist?" he asked. "No, sir." "Did he run?" "No." "Did he raise his voice?" "No." The chief sat back. "So, explain to me why my son was treated like a threat." The second officer shifted uncomfortably. "We followed protocol," he said. Chief Harris's eyes hardened. "Protocol should protect people," he said, "not profile them." The room fell silent. "I'm initiating a formal review," the chief continued. "Not because he's my son, because this should never happen to anyone." The first officer swallowed. "Yes, sir." Outside the room, whispers had already started. The story was spreading. Not publicly, internally. A chief's son, handcuffed, for nothing. Some officers were angry, others were nervous, a few were thoughtful. And Marcus? Marcus didn't want to talk about it at school. But he didn't have to. Someone had filmed part of it. A short clip, grainy, shaky, just enough to raise questions. By lunchtime, people were staring. By the end of the day, his name was trending locally. Marcus sat on his bed that night, phone buzzing non-stop, feeling smaller than he ever had. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted power. He just wanted to go home. Down the hall, his father stood in the doorway watching him, understanding something he hadn't fully understood before. That authority didn't erase vulnerability. That respect wasn't automatic. And that one call had changed everything, but it shouldn't have been necessary, because somewhere out there another kid was walking home. And no one was calling for him. The video was only 26 seconds long, no context, no explanation, just a shaky clip. Filmed from across the street. A black teenager standing on a sidewalk, hands raised, police lights flickering off camera, the sound of cuffs clicking shut. That was all it took. By morning, it was everywhere. Local Facebook groups, community pages, then Twitter, then national feeds. The caption changed depending on who posted it. This could have ended badly. Another kid stopped for nothing. What would have happened without that phone call? Marcus didn't see the video at first. His mom took his phone away when the notifications became too much. Hundreds of messages, most from strangers, some supportive, some cruel, some demanding answers he didn't have. But his name was out there now. And once the internet finds a name, it doesn't let go easily. At police headquarters, the mood shifted overnight. Chief Harris walked into the building to a silence he'd never felt before. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed him, some with sympathy, others with resentment. In the briefing room, officers whispered, "Internal affairs is already involved." They're saying the chief's son was cuffed. Bet this disappears fast. No way, not now. A senior officer approached him quietly. "Sir," he said, "the mayor's office called. They want a statement." Chief Harris nodded. "I'll handle it," he said. But he already knew this couldn't be handled quietly. At Jefferson High, Marcus felt it immediately. Teachers looked at him differently. Some too carefully. Others avoided his eyes. Altogether, in the hallway, whispers followed him like shadows. "That's him. That's the kid. His dad's the chief. Lucky. Lucky." Marcus clenched his jaw. At lunch, his friend Jamal slid into the seat across from him. "You okay?" Jamal asked. Marcus shrugged. "They put cuffs on you, man," Jamal said quietly. "That's not okay." Marcus stared at his tray. "They took them off," he said. "Only because of who your dad is," Jamal replied. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. That afternoon, the department released a short statement. "We are aware of the incident involving a juvenile and are conducting a full internal review." It satisfied no one. Within hours, former residents began speaking up. A college student shared her story of being searched outside a convenience store. A delivery driver talked about being stopped 3 times in 1 month. A retired teacher described being followed home by patrol cars. Different ages, different backgrounds, same pattern. The hashtag spread. I, walking while black, Chief Harris watched the coverage from his office, jaw tight. This wasn't about Marcus anymore. This was about everything that had been ignored for years. That night, a community meeting was announced. Emergency session, town hall auditorium, standing room only. Marcus didn't want to go. His mom insisted. "You should see this," she said gently. "Not to speak, just to understand." The room buzzed with tension. Residents packed the seats. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras hummed softly. Chief Harris stood at the podium, not as a father, as the chief. "My son was detained last week," he began. A murmur rippled through the room. "He did nothing wrong," the chief continued. "But what happened to him happens to others who don't get a phone call." The room fell silent. "This department has failed to earn trust," he said plainly, "and we are going to address that." Hands shot up, stories poured out, anger, fear, years of bottled frustration. Marcus sat beside his mother, heart pounding. For the first time, he realized how many people had been waiting for permission to speak. At the back of the room, the 2 officers stood quietly, listening. No uniforms this time, just men. When the meeting ended, no one felt better, but something had shifted. The silence was gone. Outside, under the glow of streetlights, Marcus looked up at his father. "Would this be happening if it wasn't me?" he asked. Chief Harris didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "And that's why it has to matter." Marcus nodded slowly. He wasn't sure what came next, but he knew one thing. The call had changed everything. And now the truth was louder than the sirens ever were. Internal affairs didn't move fast. They moved carefully, which in the world of police departments often meant quietly, but this time quiet wasn't an option. The video had crossed state lines. Civil rights groups were watching. The mayor's office wanted updates twice a day, and the chief himself had signed the review order. Every decision was under a microscope. The 2 officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Not as punishment, the statement said, as procedure. The word echoed through the department like a shield. Procedure. It had protected them before. Now it was being tested. Marcus stayed home from school the day the announcement broke. His mom insisted. The house felt smaller than usual, like the walls were listening. On the television, a legal analyst spoke calmly about reasonable suspicion and officer discretion. Marcus muted the sound. He didn't want theory. He wanted to forget the sound of cuffs closing. At headquarters, the officers sat in separate interview rooms. Same building, different silences. Officer Reynolds stared at the table, replaying the moment over and over. The call, the kid, the decision to cuff first and ask later. He'd done it before, dozens of times. This time was different only because of the name. That truth burned. Officer Grant in the next room clenched his jaw as the investigator asked question after question. Why did you escalate? Why cuffs? Why detainment without cause? Grant answered carefully. They'd been trained to. Across town, Chief Harris sat in his office, hands folded, listening to the preliminary findings. Policy was followed, the investigator said slowly. But intent is questionable. The chief leaned back. Explain, he said. There's no written violation. The investigator continued. But there is a pattern, discretion applied unevenly. The chief nodded. That was the language of systems avoiding blame. But, the investigator added, given the public pressure, the department will need to respond visibly. That word again. Visibly. Later that week, the press conference was announced. Chief Harris stood behind the podium, cameras flashing. After reviewing the facts, he said, the department is implementing immediate changes to our stop and detain protocols. He outlined them carefully. Mandatory documentation for all stops, supervisor approval for handcuffing juveniles, body cam review within 24 hours, and then the line that made the room go still. The officers involved will receive disciplinary action. Questions exploded. What kind? Is that enough? Is this just optics? Chief Harris didn't flinch. This is accountability, he said, and it doesn't end here. Marcus watched from the couch, arms crossed, heart pounding. His mom sat beside him. They're changing things, she said. For who? Marcus asked quietly. The answer didn't come. Days passed. The officers returned to duty, reassigned to desk work for now. Whispers followed them through the building. Some colleagues avoided them, others defended them. They're being thrown under the bus, one officer muttered. For doing what? At home, Marcus tried to focus on school, but concentration came in fragments. Every siren made his chest tighten. Every patrol car slowed his steps. One afternoon, he stopped walking. A cruiser idled at the corner. The officer inside glanced at him. Marcus froze. Then the cruiser drove on. He exhaled shakily. This was the part no report captured. That night, his father knocked on his bedroom door. "Can we talk?" he asked. Marcus nodded. Chief Harris sat on the edge of the bed. "I've been asked to step back from overseeing the investigation," he said. Marcus frowned. "Why?" "To avoid conflict of interest," his father replied. "That's fair," Marcus said. His father looked at him. "It shouldn't take my absence for this to be taken seriously," he said quietly. Marcus didn't know what to say. Neither did his father. Outside their home, the conversation continued without them. Activists demanded firings. Unions pushed back. The city braced for escalation, and somewhere in the middle of it all was a 17-year-old who had become a symbol without ever asking to be one. Marcus lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The call had changed everything. But the question lingered. Would it change enough? Because if the system only corrected itself when exposed, what happened in the dark? The room was smaller than Marcus expected. No grand courtroom, no dramatic setting. Just a long table, neutral walls, and a panel of people he didn't know, all wearing expressions that tried very hard to be impartial. This was the Independent Review Board. External, civilian-led, supposedly neutral. Marcus sat beside his mother, hands folded tightly in his lap. His father wasn't there, not because he didn't want to be, but because he couldn't. Conflict of interest. That phrase had followed them for weeks. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Marcus Hill," she said. "Thank you for being here." Marcus nodded. "You're not required to speak today," she continued. "But if you choose to, this is your opportunity to tell us what happened, in your own words." The room felt too quiet. Marcus's heart pounded in his ears. He glanced at his mother. She squeezed his hand once, just once. He took a breath. "They told me to put my hands up," he began. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I did," he said. "Right away." The panel listened. "They asked where I was coming from. I said school. They didn't believe me." His fingers tightened. "They put cuffs on me," he said. "I didn't understand why." One of the panel members leaned forward slightly. "How did that make you feel?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "Small," he said finally, "like I was already guilty." The word hung in the air. Another panelist spoke. "Did you feel threatened?" Marcus nodded. "Yes," he said, "but I was more scared of what might happen if I reacted wrong." Silence followed, the kind that wasn't empty, the kind that meant people were listening. Marcus continued. "I kept thinking about what people see when they look at me," he said, "and how fast they decide who I am." His voice wavered. "I did everything right," he said, "and it still wasn't enough." His mother looked down, blinking hard. The chairwoman thanked him. "You've been very brave," she said. Marcus didn't feel brave. He felt tired. Outside the building, cameras waited, microphones, questions. His mother shielded him as they walked past, her hand firm on his back. Inside, the board continued. They reviewed footage, listened to radio transcripts, compared stops. Patterns emerged, not shocking, just undeniable. That evening, the board released a preliminary statement. "We find reason to believe that implicit bias influenced the decision to detain." The word bias hit the news cycle hard. Unions responded immediately. "This is a witch hunt," one representative said. "Officers are being judged unfairly." Community leaders pushed back. So was Marcus. The city split along familiar lines. Chief Harris watched from his living room, uniform folded neatly beside him. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. Not because he lacked authority, but because he finally understood its limits. Late that night, Marcus sat alone on his bed, staring at his hands. They still remembered the weight of the cuffs. His phone buzzed. A message from someone he didn't know. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Another followed. "That happened to me too," and another. "I wish someone had listened." Marcus set the phone down. He hadn't wanted to be a voice, but silence had chosen him first. Downstairs, his father stood in the doorway, watching his son, understanding something he had avoided for years, that leadership meant more than policy. It meant listening, especially when it hurt. And tomorrow, the board would make its recommendations. Decisions would be made. Careers would shift. But Marcus knew something deeper had already changed, because once the truth is spoken out loud, it doesn't go back into the dark. The recommendation came at 8:47 a.m., typed, signed, released. The Independent Review Board concluded that the detention of Marcus Hill was unjustified, influenced by implicit bias, and inconsistent with equitable policing standards. The language was careful, the meaning was not. By 9:05, every major outlet had the headline, "Review Board finds bias in police detention of teen." Inside police headquarters, the atmosphere changed instantly. Roll call that morning was silent. No jokes, no small talk, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of what everyone already knew. The disciplinary actions were outlined in a second document. Officer Reynolds, formal suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, permanent notation in service record. Officer Grant, demotion, removal from patrol duties, probationary monitoring. It wasn't termination, but it wasn't nothing, and that mattered. Some officers read the notice with relief, others with anger. "This is politics," someone muttered. "They're making examples," another said, but no one said Marcus's name out loud. At City Hall, the mayor held a press conference. "This is about accountability," she said, "and rebuilding trust." A reporter asked the question everyone was waiting for. Would these actions have happened if the teen wasn't the chief's son? The mayor paused, then answered honestly. "No," she said, "and that's why we're changing the system." The honesty shocked people more than any apology could have. Across town, Marcus sat in the living room watching the press conference with his parents. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just listened. "They're being punished," his mom said softly. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For what they did," she replied. Marcus shook his head. "They did it because they could," he said. "That's different." His father looked at him sharply, then slowly nodded. At headquarters, Chief Harris addressed the department, not behind a podium, in the briefing room, face to face. "This is not an attack on policing," he said. "It's a correction." Some officers crossed their arms. Others stared straight ahead. "We cannot demand trust while dismissing fear," the chief continued, "and we cannot protect the public if we decide who deserves protection." A few heads lowered. A few jaws tightened. "This department will change," he said, "with or without your comfort." That line landed hard. The union responded within hours. A formal complaint, a threat of legal action, language about overreach and morale. The city braced. Protests were announced, not violent, quiet. Candles, signs, names. Marcus attended one without telling his parents. He stood at the edge of the crowd, hoodie up, hands in pockets. No one recognized him. That was strange, comforting. A woman stepped forward to speak. "They stopped my son 3 times before he was 18, she said. "He never made it home." The crowd fell silent. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He realized something then. This wasn't his story anymore. He was just the crack in the wall. The damage had been there long before. That night, his father found him sitting on the porch. "You didn't tell me you were going," Chief Harris said quietly. Marcus shrugged. "I needed to see it," he replied. His father sat beside him. "I've worn this badge for decades," he said. "I thought change came from the inside." Marcus looked at him. "Maybe it does," he said, "but only when people outside force it." Chief Harris exhaled slowly. For the first time, he didn't argue. Inside the house, the television replayed the footage again. The cuffs, the sidewalk, the silence, the image that had started everything. And tomorrow the department would face something even harder than discipline. They would face reform, and not everyone would survive it. Reform didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with resistance. New policies were announced quietly at first, updated training manuals, mandatory bias workshops, revised stop-and-detain procedures printed in black and white. On paper it looked clean. In practice it was messy. Officers complained about extra paperwork. Supervisors argued over interpretation. Veterans scoffed at what they called political policing. But the rules were rules now. Every stop required justification. Every detention had to be documented. Every complaint was reviewed externally. No shortcuts. The department felt slower, more careful. And for the first time, some officers felt watched. "This is what accountability feels like," Chief Harris said during a closed-door meeting. "Get used to it." Outside, The department, the city adjusted too. Community forums replaced town halls. Officers attended without uniforms, sitting in folding chairs, listening instead of speaking. Some left early, others stayed. Marcus attended one with his mother. He didn't sit in the front. He didn't want to be seen, but people recognized him anyway. A man leaned over and whispered, "Thank you." Marcus nodded, unsure how to respond. He hadn't done anything heroic. He'd just survived. At school, things slowly shifted. Teachers stopped tiptoeing around him. Friends treated him normally again. The whispers faded, but something inside Marcus had changed. He noticed things now. How people crossed the street when they saw him. How security guards watched him longer in stores. How silence followed certain questions. He also noticed when things went right. An officer who waved instead of stopping him. A patrol car that slowed, then moved on. A question asked before an assumption was made. Small things, but they mattered. One afternoon, Marcus found his father in the garage, polishing his badge. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said. Chief Harris looked up. "I know," he replied. "I just need to remember what it's supposed to mean." They worked in silence for a while. Then Marcus spoke. "Do you ever wish you hadn't answered that call?" he asked. His father paused. "No," he said. "I wish I'd made it unnecessary." That night, Marcus wrote an essay for school. The prompt was simple. Describe a moment that changed how you see the world. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Then he wrote about the sidewalk, about the cuffs, about the radio crackling to life. But mostly, he wrote about what came after, the listening, the discomfort, the slow, imperfect change. His teacher returned the paper a week later. At the bottom she'd written, "Your voice matters. Don't stop using it." Marcus folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his backpack. For the first time since that afternoon, he felt something close to peace. But the story wasn't finished yet, because while systems can change, healing takes longer, and the final test wasn't what the department would do next. It was what Marcus would carry forward. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges. The headlines faded. The hashtags slowed. The city moved on to the next crisis. But for Marcus, the memory didn't disappear. It settled. Weeks turned into months. The investigation closed. Reforms stayed. Some enforced, some quietly resisted, but the department was undeniably different than it had been before. Marcus noticed it most in the pauses. Officers asked more questions now. Supervisors hesitated before approving stops. People thought twice, not because they had become perfect, but because they had been seen. Marcus finished his junior year with good grades and a strange sense of distance. He laughed with friends, studied for exams, planned for college. And yet some part of him remained on that sidewalk. One afternoon, walking home from basketball practice, he saw flashing lights ahead. A patrol car, another teenager. Hands raised. Marcus's chest tightened. He slowed his steps, staying across the street, pretending to scroll on his phone while watching everything unfold. The officer spoke calmly, asked questions, checked ID, no cuffs. After a few minutes, the teen was waved on. Marcus exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath. That was the moment he understood something important. Change wasn't loud, it was subtle, and it depended on who was watching. That night, Marcus talked to his father longer than he had in weeks. "I don't want to be known for what happened to me," Marcus said quietly. "I want it to mean something." Chief Harris nodded. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about the messages he'd received, the stories people had shared, the fear he'd felt. "I want to help make sure people don't feel alone like that," he said. His father smiled sadly. "That's a heavy thing to carry," he said. "I already am," Marcus replied. Marcus started volunteering with a local youth group. Quietly, no announcements, no cameras. He talked to kids about knowing their rights, about staying calm, about speaking up when something felt wrong. He didn't tell them who his father was. That part didn't matter. What mattered was listening. One evening, a boy no older than Marcus had been asked him a question. "What if they don't listen?" the boy asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Then you make sure someone does," he said, "even if it takes time." The boy nodded, absorbing the words. Marcus recognized the look in his eyes, fear mixed with hope. At home, Marcus kept the essay his teacher had returned. He added to it over time. New thoughts, new clarity. It became something else, not a story about injustice, but about responsibility, about what happens after the moment passes. Chief Harris announced his retirement. Near the end of the year, not because of pressure, because he said it was time for new leadership. At his farewell gathering, a junior officer approached Marcus. "I was on patrol that day," the officer said quietly. "I saw what happened. I think about it a lot." Marcus nodded. "So do I," he replied. The officer hesitated. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting it disappear." Marcus didn't respond right away. He didn't need thanks. He needed it to matter. As graduation approached, Marcus stood in front of his mirror one morning, adjusting his tie. He looked older now, more sure of himself, but when he rolled up his sleeve, the faint mark on his wrist was still there, barely visible, but real. He touched it gently, then let his sleeve fall. Some things don't leave. They become part of who you are, and Marcus knew exactly what he would do with it. Marcus didn't remember the exact date when things finally felt quiet again. There was no moment when the weight suddenly disappeared. No dramatic turning point where the past stopped reaching for him. It faded slowly, like a bruise healing beneath the skin. By the time graduation arrived, the city looked the same. Same streets, same patrol cars, same routines. But Marcus wasn't the same person walking through them. He stood in line with his classmates, gown draped over his shoulders, the sun warm against his face. His parents sat in the crowd, his mother wiping away tears, his father standing straighter than he had in years. When Marcus's name was called, the applause felt normal. That mattered. After the ceremony, as people laughed and hugged and took pictures, a younger student approached him. "You're Marcus, right?" the boy asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "My brother told me about you," the boy said. "He said you showed people they can't just ignore us." Marcus swallowed. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "But you didn't stay quiet," the boy replied. That night, Marcus placed his graduation cap on his desk and sat down. In the dark, thinking about everything that had led him there, the sidewalk, the cuffs, the radio call, and everything that followed. He understood now that the call hadn't saved him because of authority. It saved him because someone listened. And that was the lesson he carried forward. Years later, Marcus would walk past a group of teenagers on the same street where it had happened. He'd slow his steps, not out of fear, but awareness. He would watch, listen, and if he ever saw someone being treated like they didn't matter, he knew exactly what he would do. Because silence isn't neutral. It chooses a side. And voices, especially the unheard ones, only disappear when no one is willing to speak. So if you ever find yourself watching something that feels wrong, don't look away, don't wait for the call. Be the voice that changes everything. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to The Unheard. Share it. Someone out there still needs to be seen. And remember, listening